This is Beyond Busy. I'm Graham Alcott. I'm the author of a number of books, including the global bestseller How to Be a Productivity Ninja, and I'm the founder of Think Productive. We help people to make space for what matters and get more done, and we partner with some of the world's leading companies who share our mission to transform the world of work. Beyond Busy is where I explore the often messy truths and contradictory relationships around topics like work-life balance, happiness and success, and explore with interesting people what makes them tick. In short, this is where we ask the bigger questions about work. My guest today is James Routledge. James is a mental health advocate and author of the book Mental Health at Work. After burning out at 24 when his first business failed, he founded Sanctus, who are on a mission to help companies invest in the mental health of their employees. In this episode, James talks openly about his experiences. We cover some of the myths of mental health, how to manage boundaries, and how to question some of the conventional narratives on mental health. It's a really important conversation. This is James Routledge. I'm with James Routledge. How are you?
Hey, Graham.
Yeah, really nice to have you on. Let's start by just talking about your story. What I really want to focus on in this conversation is mental health. And your story is really interesting. I saw it written down somewhere that you basically described your early career as burned out at 24. And you were running a business at the time. So do you want to just describe the lead up to that burnout and what did that feel like for you?
Yeah, I went to university at 19, like many people in the UK, mainly because I didn't know what else I wanted to do at that age, and university was the next obvious stepping stone. I'd had a year out, done some travelling and picked a pretty vanilla course, history and politics, just because, and was quickly quite bored at university and wasn't stimulated intellectually or academically or emotionally or stimulated at all, really, other than going out and having a good time with my mates, which I very much enjoyed, and really fell into the world of startups and entrepreneurship. I got very excited by the idea of, or the possibility of, building my own company that could, create a life for myself. I could create wealth for myself. I could create a certain amount of freedom for myself. And I remember another entrepreneur that I followed on social media at this point putting a photo up of them in Bali with their laptop looking out onto a beach, and that image just epitomized freedom for me. And I remember very much wanting that. So kind of, set out to try and build that, really. So it was quite, it was naive in some respects, going on that sort of very early startup journey and wanting to build my own business. There was some parts of those motivations which were quite pure in terms of wanting freedom and wanting something else that kind of wasn't the corporate world. A lot of my friends were starting to look at grad schemes and working for big banks or big accountancy firms or big law firms. Yet there was another part of that pursuit, which was what I'd describe as ego-fueled, really wanting to, feel or look special or look cool or look interesting amongst my peers, or being able to make money or create this status for myself. And really that probably took over in the end. The business that I started with my friends George from university was quite shallow. There was no real purpose to the business. It was a social network for live sport. There was no real attachment or passion there. It was just something to do. And then I landed in this culture, this startup culture, which was all go.
Yeah.
Work hard, play hard, hustle hard, move fast and break things. Yeah, kind of being young and impressionable, very much bought into that, of like, that's how we succeed. We persevere, we push, we stick our chest out, we blag, you fake it till you make it, all this kind of Dragon's Den, the apprentice kind of culture. And burned out as a result. I had nothing left. Like, I expended all of myself trying to pursue something that, wasn't even really what I wanted in the end, actually. Wound up feeling very stressed and very anxious.
Yeah, and how much of that burning out do you think was, so obviously you've got a motivation to try and improve yourself, to try and build a business, and as soon as you've got a business partner and you've got investors, you've got other people that you want to show up for and please and get everything right for. And then also you mentioned that idea of the hustle culture. Like, I'm just really curious about how much you think that, that idea of hustling hard, and if it's not working, just work harder. How much of that external influence was sort of playing into you reaching burnout?
Yeah, a lot, I would say. I think if there's a balance of what was my own input into that burnout, I'd say it was probably 30-40%. And then the rest was kind of systemic, I think, and me attaching myself to that mindset of, looking around all the role models I saw, and they all seemed to be working like 70, 80-hour weeks. They seemed to never switch off. And so I thought that was the way I needed to be. I think in the end, though, I think there's I've been burned out multiple times in my life. Like, I wouldn't claim to say I've only felt what I would describe as burnout once. I think I had one major episode of feeling completely burned out and exhausted, and kind of really, really feeling like I needed to run away as a result of it. But often for me, when I feel burned out, it's not just that I'm physically tired from the volume and quantity of tasks or work I'm doing. It's often because I'm not being filled up. Like, there's no fuel there. And I think actually for me, in that first business, it wasn't so much that I was physically exhausted from the sheer volume of work. It was because I was running on empty. Like, there was no purpose that was guiding me or fueling me every day.
And then I guess it's a bit of a cliche, isn't it? For, you hear a lot from, sort of entrepreneurial influencers and people who are talking about not just entrepreneurship, but work as well, that find work that fits your purpose. And I guess that idea of working on the thing that, you can expend energy on it, but it's also filling you up, and that being a virtuous circle. That's why that's so important, isn't it? Like, if you're spending all of your time working on something that doesn't feel like it has a purpose, then I suppose the flip side of that is you've got to spend also a lot of time filling yourself up somewhere else and kind of convincing yourself that it's the right thing to just be spending time on.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, there are lots of different places that I can restore my energy. My cup might be filled from the sheer joy of what I'm working on because it's so purposeful for me. Obviously, also I can feel rested and restored through rest.
And
actually resting. So I think there are multiple facets to it. But I think that's, personally for me, that's why doing work that I find purposeful and meaningful is really important to me, because I know I'm probably going to put a lot of myself into my work. I'm that way inclined. So it's kind of got to be worth it. And that will give me the energy to keep going.
Yeah. And you've been, really, I think what's interesting about the book, which we'll come on to, but also just the way you put yourself out there online, is like you're really open about your own mental health. So was that like always a really conscious thing for you? I know you started a blog around it. Like, what was the motivation to really like talk about it and have that conversation initially?
Well, I didn't for so long. So that's probably the first thing. I definitely didn't grow up being open about how I felt or articulating my emotions. So all the way up until that major sort of burnout, and I was on Sky News yesterday and the guy called it a breakdown, whatever you want to call it. Up until that point, I'd never articulated or talked about how I felt. I don't think I'd ever been vulnerable, really. I don't think I'd ever named an emotion. I don't think I was really in touch with emotions, feelings of sadness or anger, all the way possibly to feelings of joy and sort of hopefulness. So, I'd never really done it. So I suppose for me now, I've experienced the power and the transformational change of taking the time to become aware of how I'm feeling, articulate it and share it with others, and then through coaching, for example, or therapy, working through some of those things if needed to. And I've seen the benefit of that, and it's been a complete. It's changed the course of my life and taken my life in directions that I would never have expected. I would never have expected to have written a book on mental health. That was never something that was on my radar. It was never something I felt like was laid out in front of me. Yet, because of that exploratory process of articulating how you feel, I find that working in that way opens up lots of paths in your life that you may not have typically been aware were out there for you.
Yeah, and we're both white males, both from the Midlands as well. And there's a line you have about Stoke, which is something like it's the last bastion of Northern machismo or something, which I really like. But why do you think some people do find it much harder to talk about emotions? I'm with you on the, I see the value of coaching and therapy in my own life. But there are an awful lot of people, in our position, particularly men actually, who just don't open up or talk about that stuff, or find it really difficult to be vulnerable. Like, why do you think that is?
It's a very complex issue, isn't it, with lots of sort of intersectionality, and you've just mentioned, and I write about this in the book, and it was one of my first 1-star reviews, which was quite enjoyable, of me saying, look, I'm in the privileged position where I'm a white man, so actually when I talk about my mental health, I often get a round of applause. Thank you, James. Yeah. Thank you for saying something that we're all struggling to say. Thank you for giving others the permission to do so. Now, perhaps, and I'm in the startup world, right? So I work in the startup environment, typically open-minded, typically quite progressive. Now, let's say I'm not a white man working in the startup environment, and I'm someone somewhere else. Me talking about my mental health or how I feel could mean me losing my job. So there's a real privilege for me there that I'm well aware of. And I think fundamentally, though, whoever and wherever you are, the reason we don't open up is because we don't feel safe or we don't feel comfortable to. And often that is through fear of judgment or fear of dismissal. And when I say dismissal, I don't just mean being dismissed from your job. That's one way. I mean just dismissal of not being met, of like someone, you saying something really important for you to someone, and it just goes completely over their head. It's like, oh, do you want another beer, mate? I think that's also the risk. There's always a risk in being vulnerable. Never gets easier. So being vulnerable for you might be saying, I'm depressed, or being vulnerable might be, I don't like my job. There's all these different ways in which we might want to share and express how we're feeling. So I think fundamentally for whoever you are, whatever your gender, your ethnic background, your sexual orientation, whoever you are, I think really the risk in ever sharing how you're feeling or opening up is the risk of being judged and not being kind of really seen for what you're saying.
And so you're on a mission around mental health, and so we're going to talk in a minute about mental health at work. But your company as well, Sanctus, is doing some incredible stuff in this whole space as well. Do you want to tell us what Sanctus is and like what it does, and just tell us the story?
When I first started experiencing the benefit of sharing my story and being more open about how I was feeling, I felt like this whole world opened up in front of me of feelings and emotions, and this kind of like self-development world, and this, my inner psychology and everything. I started working with a coach initially to begin that exploration and begin some of that work, and just saw the humongous benefit in proactively taking time to talk through and work through and process some of the challenges in my life. So 5 years ago, those challenges were, I've shut down a company. I feel really embarrassed. I feel really gutted about it. I'm heartbroken. What do I do next? Where do I go? Who am I now? And working with a coach really helped me to, move through some of those questions and make some changes in my life and kind of grow up or just grow. And Sanctus was born out of the desire to, I suppose, offer the experiences that I'd been having to more and more people. So we started a mission to inspire people to work on their mental health like we do our physical health, and practically support that through providing coaching in workplaces. So we'll partner with a workplace, and employees in that company will be able to access Sanctus coaching, which is a space, impartial, confidential space for them to work with a coach on any of these thresholds or challenges in their life. And it's a very unique space that is rare in our society today, where you can bring your doubts, your fears, your hopes, your longings. It's not a conversation with a mate down the pub. It's not a conversation with your mum on the phone. It's not a conversation with your manager. It's a conversation with a coach who's there literally just to support you. So it can be a really life-changing product and a really unique product. And we work with about 100 different businesses right now, and we've just raised a decent amount of investment to scale that and do more. So all born out of my experience, really, and then the experience of others. As I shared my story, I met other people that resonated, and we grew a community and a team of people that are all on the same mission.
I'm guessing the answer is good, but just describe the difference in the feeling with, I'm now working on something that has a real purpose to it, and as opposed to what you had before. That must feel good, I'm imagining.
Yeah, much better and much more sustainable. You can keep pushing. I think that, don't get me wrong, like, you can push and push and push and push, and you can push through even when you're not loving something. We're all very capable to persevere. Yeah, it's very hard, and can result in burning out or blowing up or whatever you want to call it. So working on something that I'm innately motivated by for myself. There's that selfish desire of, like, I want to solve this problem for me. And then there's the feeling of contribution, the feeling of contributing to the world in an impactful way, and actually just having some like meaningful change on people and on the world. We've got a feedback space where anyone on the team can go in and look at some of the most recent feedback from people who've had Sanctus coaching sessions, and it makes the heart swell every time. It's real people, who've had real moments of connection in their day with themselves and with someone else, and that feels really good. I think the honest truth, though, that a lot of people who work in kind of vocational spaces might not admit is that there's a dark side to it as well. There's a shadow side of working on something that feels very noble, because there can be a feeling of never enough. It's like, one company, Sanctus, one person, me, cannot solve the global mental health crises, nor can we provide coaching to 7 billion people on the planet. We can give it a good go. So there becomes other stories, I think, that come into your head about why you can't stop or why you can't switch off. We need to do more. We can never say no, because someone always needs help. So it's not all roses.
Yeah, like I've got a few friends who work in charity organizations or social work, and that sort of feeling of almost like compassion fatigue, isn't it, where it's like I feel like I need to give because me taking the night off and me working on my own rest and recuperation is probably at the expense of someone in a much worse situation, and the guilt of that it's a really huge issue for a lot of people. And I think in what I've observed from a couple of people in social work is that you kind of end up, get a couple of different types of social worker, right? You get the ones who are very heart driven and if they don't like really look after themselves and make that a really big priority, they just burn out repeatedly. Or you get the ones who actually their way of coping with it is to go the other way and to just become procedure driven. And so it, you almost have to put, if I'm following the rules, I'm doing what I'm told, so I don't invest as much emotionally, and that's like the other way to survive it. But I do think there's something, there is that dark side, isn't there, to working with purpose. I like that terminology. Let's talk a little bit about the book. So, Mental Health at Work, part of the Penguin Business Experts series, and what I really liked in the book, there's a couple of things that I wanted to talk about. One was the mental health myths that you talk about in the book. So, do you want to talk about some of the myths of mental health?
Yeah, see if I can remember them. Without
I've got them written down if you want me to.
No, that was it was a really important section of the book for me, and working in the mental health space for the last 5 years and going from someone who had no idea what mental health was. That was one of the first things I talk about in the book, is like, my expertise is literally just my inexpertise. That's what makes me credible. I am you. I am the reader. I know what it feels like to be scared and confused and not really understand these big feelings and not know how it's going to be received when I talk to someone in a work environment, but also wanting something to be different at the same time, and all those conflicting emotions. And I've just found over the years there were just some sort of like platitudes about mental health that are just great misconceptions. Like they've grown and grown over the years, whether it's through media, culture, film, TV, whatever it might be, and they're just plain wrong. There's just some stuff that's just like plain wrong. Like, down to one of the things I talk about often is the language around mental health. So someone will say something. Someone will like just use the wrong, like they'll just say words that make no sense. Like, oh yeah, he had. Someone will say something like, oh, he has mental health. Yeah, he does. We all do.
Yeah.
It's like this. Basically, I think the biggest misconception that we still have to work really hard to kind of transition away from is that mental health is mental illness. Mental health is not mental illness. Mental ill health is one part of mental health, which is one part of health. So, mental health is our full range of emotion. It's all of who we are, not just our suffering or depression or anxiety or suicidal thoughts, for example, which you might class on one end of a spectrum of mental health. And I think then the other big one, if that's one of the biggest, the other big one that I write about and talk to is that, again, this sentence makes no sense, is that mental health is weakness.
Yeah.
Now, again, from a language perspective, that sentence makes no sense. It's nonsense. We all have mental health, so does that mean we're all weak? Maybe it does at times. But I think there's this great conception or misconception that when we are to be vulnerable or we're to talk about how we feel in any capacity, that is a sign of weakness. And I think that's born out of the Industrial Revolution. That feeling was probably began 200 years ago, and we're here in 2022, and we're still living from that place when the world is so different. And actually, time and time and time again, do we all see that when we see someone share something, be vulnerable, be honest, it's a sign of strength, not weakness. How many times do we see a sports person cry, or a great leader or a actor or a musician sort of really say something from the heart, and we applaud them and we're really thankful for it. So same in workplaces. I've seen CEOs stand up in front of their team and talk about the darkest times in their life, and their employees love them for it and respect them for it. So I think this whole vulnerability is weakness line is is dying and has to die, and that's one of the biggest misconceptions around mental health.
It's a really hard one, particularly when you're in like a leadership role, or where you've got people who are relying on you, and you know that myth is out there. You know, I've had it myself where I've had periods of depression, and generally what's happened with that has been that Elena, who's the MD of the business, I'll be really open with her, and I'll say, hey, I'm just having one of those days today, I'm just staying in bed. And I'll just stay in bed for a couple of days, basically. And then it will just kind of pass, and then I'll sort of get back to normal. But the rest of the team, the rest of the organization kind of has no idea. And I don't, you know, and sort of like certainly years ago when that was happening more, I was much more reluctant to talk about that, because it just felt like when you're in that position where people's confidence in your business depends on their confidence in you, you have to, you know, really kind of, you really have to kind of articulate yourself as someone who is not weak and is in control and is able to deal with stuff and is resilient. And like those things almost become a reflection of the confidence of the business, don't they? So what do you say to that? Like if people are in roles where, you know, let's say you've got 20 people that really rely on you, and yeah, you want to be vulnerable, but there's a chance that your vulnerability makes other people feel vulnerable too. It's a really difficult one, right?
I'd challenge some of it, to be honest. You know, I think, again, I talked about it, you know, a few moments ago about feeling safe to open up about something and the fear of judgment. And if you are a CEO or if you are in a leadership role, there can be a big fear of judgment, right? I fear the judgment of my team. They're going to think I can't do this. They're not going to trust me. They don't want to work for me. They're going to be scared that their job's under threat because, you know, the business is falling apart because I'm falling apart. And look, I've been there. I'm no saint in this, because I felt very much like that running Sanctus. Yeah, it's not always true, and I think it often paints a picture of employees in a certain way. To be honest, it often paints a picture of the employee of saying, well, they're not going to be able to handle it. If I tell them that I'm struggling, you know, they're gonna freak out. That may be true. That may not. So I'm not doubting that for any leader, it can feel extremely hard to show any form of vulnerability to, you know, your team, even to the extent of saying something like, I don't know, you know, as a leader, if you get asked what we should do, you know, you always feel like, or you might always feel like you need to give an answer or a sense of direction, when the honest thing might be, I haven't got a clue. And that can feel really difficult. I think I'd challenge any leader to reflect on how true the statement is initially. And just because I think there can just be a quite instant, and I can't do that, you know, without really thinking, well, what is it I feel like I can't do and why? You know, what's the worst thing that could happen? So that moment of reflection, I think, can be really helpful. I think then secondly, I think leaders have to have some support around them in places where, you know, one can be as they are, one can be really vulnerable. Because then in those spaces, you know, you might get the support that then gives you enough energy, enough resilience to confidently talk about how you are feeling or what might be going on. And that's also a choice as well. You know, not every leader has to start talking about their personal life or what's going on in front of their whole team. That's a choice. The reason I think we're talking about it and I mention it is because we know now that leaders who show vulnerability and who do bring more of their humanity and their personality into their work do create great trust with their teams. And it does work, just from a practical leadership perspective. But in general, I do think there's a bit of a story we tell ourselves as CEOs or leaders or founders of whatever, that people won't take it. People can't take it. If I tell them I'm struggling, they won't handle it. And yeah, I question that both for myself and for others, that I actually do think people can't take it. They've probably heard worse in their life, actually. And actually, if they hear their manager say that they're struggling, it might actually give them permission to put their hand up and say, me too.
Yeah, I've definitely found that easier in more recent years. And I suppose part of that is having when the first time I talked about it with the team, it was a retrospective thing. It was like, this had already happened. You didn't really know about it, but here's what happened. And it almost felt like, because I then told them a story that involved everything didn't fall off a cliff then, did it? It sort of felt like it made it easier to talk about it in the moment a bit more, when it's happened more recently. So, yeah, I think you might be right there that, sometimes, I think sometimes just as people, let alone as managers or entrepreneurs or whatever labels, just as people, we often just take on more than we need to, don't we?
We're trying to protect people. We're trying to protect them. And that's a great thing, isn't it? It's like, I remember when I was first struggling, my mum was like, why did you say anything? Right. And I didn't tell. I wasn't scared of judgment from my mum. There's no way my mum would ever judge me, but I didn't want to worry her. And people say this all the time. And I think it's probably a lot of that in leadership, a lot of martyrdom of like, I just don't want people to worry.
The other thing from the book I wanted to talk about was you talk about boundaries. And it really made me think, because I think sometimes the conversation around not just mental health, but just in general, the idea of psychological safety, the idea of, making workplaces as inclusive as possible. All of this kind of leads us to a place where we have to be more open with emotions. We have to talk about empathy more. There has to be more of a sense of vulnerability in some of those conversations. And sometimes I guess what can happen from that is you find yourself just out of your depth. And I loved your honesty in there of saying, like, I'm not a practitioner. There's some stuff that I don't know if you're in a really dark place. And like, as your manager, it's not actually for me to sort of diagnose that or step into that. So that was just a really interesting thing that just stopped me in my tracks a bit and made me think. And so do you want to just talk a bit about boundaries and how do you navigate that?
Yeah, it came up a lot for me when I first started to write about mental health, because straight away, if I'm sharing my experience, I am naturally inviting people to connect with me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And if you write something on social media, that's what you're doing. You're open for comment, for reaction. So there's naturally, there's an issue of boundaries come up. And now, look, I'll be honest, I'd never heard of the word boundaries other than playing cricket. But spend a bit of time with coaches or therapists or supervisors in the mental health space, anyone adequately trained, and the word will come up. Because a boundary is there to keep you and the person you're in a conversation or relationship with safe. A boundary can be rules, a boundary can be a personal, place of somewhere you can't stretch yourself beyond. So they're very important for keeping people safe and comfortable and protected in especially in intimate conversations. And for example, a boundary for me to be open about when writing the book is that I am not a practitioner. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a scientist. I'm not a therapist. I'm not a counselor. I'm not a coach. I am James, who has had a set of experiences with mental health and has built a mental health business. And I'm going to share those experiences. This book is not here or designed for your healing or your growth.
Yeah.
And that was me really setting the stall out on who I am, what I can do, and what I can't do. Now, what that does in that example is it makes me feel much more comfortable about writing. So I wrote about some pretty important stuff. I write about suicide in the book, for example. And because of that framing, I felt able to write about suicide in the way that I've experienced it, in the way that I know it, not presenting this immortal truth. And it also protects the reader or whoever you're having the conversation with of knowing, what they're dealing with, basically, and what they can come to you with. It's incredibly important when we get into more intimate relationships in the workplace, in particular, like managerial relationships, because the lines and the boundaries there can start to get really blurred, as you've just mentioned. If we as a workplace culture are inviting people to bring more of who they are, we're inviting people to bring their ethnicity, their sexual orientation. We're opening up spaces to talk about gender dynamics or about mental health. We're bringing in a lot of emotional information, a lot of, personally sensitive stuff. And we've all got to be honest about our boundaries, about where we can go to, and where we feel comfortable and where we are the right person to support someone. So, if you've got someone who you're managing who's coming to you every single week talking about how they can't get out of bed in the morning, how they don't feel motivated for work, and you're their manager or you're in HR, you can support that person as a colleague within the boundaries of your role. So you might be able to say, okay, well, could we be flexible about the times you start, or look at your workload or the projects you're working on? You maybe could ask them a few open questions about what else is going on in their life. But if you get into what might feel like a sort of counseling or therapeutic conversation where you're starting to unpack that person's feelings, or they're sharing with you a lot of information about what's going on in your life, there's a boundary issue there. You've crossed a boundary into a place that it's unlikely that you're qualified to be in, because that's more of a client type relationship as if you were a therapist. And I think the most important thing people can do is be really honest with themselves and with others about where their boundaries are. Even saying something like, look, I've never struggled with depression before. I have no feelings towards it. Like, I've just not gone there. I've not, I've got people in my life that have struggled. So if someone's coming to me with that, I can say, look, this isn't something I feel like I can help you with. That's a really great thing to say, because it's so clear, and then it opens up other opportunities for support for someone.
So the Brené Brown thing, clear is kind, unclear is unkind, right? And I suppose the other thing, just to reflect on that, is that often, like a colleague, relationship, or a sort of, line managerial relationship at work, I mean, they become friendships, don't they? And so I suppose we have the same issue when friends of ours might come and, and bring those kind of, that kind of data. And then it's like, your first instinct is always to try and help your friends, right? And support your friends. So it can be I think it can be really difficult sometimes to kind of know, like, where that boundary is, and just like where to draw some of those lines, right?
Yeah, I have it all the time, like with my partner Sarah. I might sort of slip into like asking her like some like coaching questions. I might say, like, what? Tell me more about that. And she can rightly say, James, go away. I don't know if I can swear. I want you to just be my boyfriend. Like, just be you. Don't try and be something you're not. And that's ultimately what it is about boundaries. Be authentically you, and your remit of who you are and who you're not. And that's the best thing you can do when sort of advocating or creating a connection around mental health with someone.
Yeah, I love that. The other thing I wanted to ask you about from the book was the story about octopus energy really struck me. And I've had Greg Jackson on the podcast before as well. But I just think their culture's really remarkable, and this whole idea of one of their values is just being straightforward, which just reading, your writing and the way you put yourself out there. One of the things I love about it is just how just open you are and straightforward and like to the point you are with a lot of that stuff. But their thing is like, if we just work in a way that's going to out behave everybody else, and work in a way that is so focused on making sure that the customer feels really good at the end of interactions, then we will win. We don't have to be the smartest, we don't have to be the cheapest, whatever. Like, this is the way to win, is to outbehave and to use this idea of being straightforward. I'd just love to hear your thoughts on Octopus Energy and like your experiences of working with them and what it's like, kind of inside the organization.
We actually don't work with Octopus Energy, we're with Octopus Group. So there's Octopus Group, but kind of one and the same. They're the octopus at the end of the day. We just don't work with that particular tentacle.
Are they going to have 8 tentacles? Is that the idea?
I imagine so, yeah. I'm sure.
I never thought of that.
Well, Simon, the founder, would love to have 8.
Yeah.
If they've not already got 8 octopus businesses, that would probably be the goal, I guess. I mean, look, they've been a partner of Sanctus's for a long time, early advocate. Simon, the founder and CEO, has been a great sort of mentor to me, actually, on the Sanctus journey. And it was quite striking for me, talking not just to them, but to loads of different businesses about, their approaches to mental health. As I was researching for the book, I wanted to speak to just kind of diverse businesses about their approach to mental health in the workplace. How are you building an organization where people can talk about mental health openly, and what are the benefits of that, and how do you do it? And so many of the things people do are just like, frighteningly simple. And it's the whole thing with mental health in general. Like, actually, a lot of the stuff we end up talking about is how to talk to each other, how to listen. This is like basic human behaviors that are, desperately difficult to do. And Octopus is a great example of, their culture about everything is guided by their values. One of their values is being straightforward, as you mentioned. So for them, it's quite a straightforward thing that mental health impacts all of their employees and all of their customers and everyone. So let's invest in the mental health of our employees and give them great benefits, great perks. Let's really look after them so that they can do their job really well and then delight our customers. It's pretty basic, to be honest. It's not, it's not that complex. And it's the same with many businesses who've got, positive cultures around how people can show up and how much of their humanity they can bring at work. It's often guided by some pretty straightforward principles.
Yeah, and I guess there's a sort of sense of care and generosity being something that if you feel that from the culture that you're working in, you're much more likely to, you're being an abundance mentality to then pass that on to customers, to pass that on to colleagues. This stuff really perpetuates itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Which to us, and you just said, it's so simple. So simple, yeah. It's culture that stops people seeing that so obviously.
Love it. We've just got a few minutes left and we've not talked about productivity. So I'm going to finish up by asking you about that. So I'd love to know what you think the relationship is between productivity and mental health. And are there some things that you do around your own productivity that are very conscious of good mental health and having the right kind of work-life balance and so on?
I mean, if you're struggling with your mental health, you're probably not going to be productive. Although having said that, there's probably a lot of people struggling with their mental health who are extremely productive. So it's not massively black and white. I think productivity, I'll be honest, that can have a bit of can be a bit of a Marmite phrase for me. I think.
Yeah, me too.
There's parts of the productivity world that have been, it's all about doing more faster, making more money, and it can be difficult for how you might feel. You might feel like you're not doing enough, or you should be doing more, which can be difficult feelings to sit with. I think one of the things about a wider exploration of who you are and just your mental health quite broadly is that, you can really start to learn about yourself, not only what excites you and what fills you up and where you feel purposeful, And obviously, if you need to be productive around something, if it's something you love, you've probably got more chance of being productive and getting stuff done. I think also, though, through a deeper exploration of yourself, you can figure out, what supports you to work well, where you work best, when you work best, what environmental conditions do you need to be in for you to work best? Do you need to be around people? Do you like working remotely? What gives you energy, what doesn't? So I think through an exploration of your mental health, I think you might rightly question what you're being productive on and what you value in your life and what you want to be working on. But I think you can definitely find out, what supports you to be energized and to be kind of emotionally available to give yourself to whatever your tasks are. Personally, I'm not really much of like a hacky, like people get very into this like productivity hacks. I've done all that. And for me, it was just a bit too much like hard work. I think I found that, it meant that it was all about just how much could I squeeze out of my day and how much could I squeeze out of myself. And that wasn't a good feeling for me. However, I'd like to think I've done a decent amount in my time on this earth. So I clearly can be very productive when I want to be. I think the things that help me to be really productive are really just when I want to do it. And it's such a boring answer, isn't it? So abstract, but when I am really engaged in something and when it really lights my fire, I just don't even think about it. I don't need to write a to-do list. I don't need to talk to anyone about it. It just gets done, and it gets done very, very quickly because that's how I work. So for me, it's more about the emotional connection to my work. If I feel that and I feel passionate, it just happens. In terms of writing my book, that was quite a test of productivity because, you've done it 6 times, I think you said. You can be emotionally connected, but it's still a slog.
Oh, yeah.
It's still a slog, no matter how much you love it. And the real thing that changed the game there for me was community, actually. So I joined a writing community and I logged on every morning and I was in a silent virtual Zoom library writing with others. And that was a massive game changer for me in terms of being able to consistently produce because there was the accountability and there was also the sense of belonging. So, wouldn't have expected to say that actually, but it made a real difference for me.
That's a really interesting one. I'm just sat there as you were saying that and thinking sometimes it's a slog because you're emotionally invested, right? Where it's like this just becomes this, I want to say this in the best possible way. And like, I know that this gets printed on, real paper that people are going to, put on their shelf for years and years. And so it just becomes this thing that because you're so invested, it becomes harder to do it. But I love that idea that through community, I guess community shows you that the way to write is to run your hand along the keyboard, right? And there's an awful lot of things that I do that I confuse with writing, but they don't actually involve running my hands along the keyboard. And it's like, on some level, you have to kind of finish by doing that. So that feels like a really good place because we're talking about the book to wind up. So mental health at work, and how can people find out about Sanctus and connect with you and just share anything that you'd like to share before we finish?
Best place to connect with me is on LinkedIn. James Routledge on LinkedIn. You'll find me there. I'm very active there. Little bit less active on Instagram at JD Routledge, and then Sanctus is Sanctus on all platforms. So website sanctus.io, and then you'll find us again on LinkedIn and Instagram.
Brilliant, James. Thank you so much for being on Beyond Busy.
Cheers, Graham.
This video is sponsored by Think Productive, home of the Productivity Ninja. We help people and organisations to increase their impact and make space for what matters through a range of workshops, programs, and coaching. Head to thinkproductive.com to find out more. Are you interested in booking me as a speaker for your event? You want to sign up for my Rev Up for the Week email? you want to buy some of my books? Or do you just want to find out what I'm doing right now? It's all at grahamallcott.com/links. And if you like this video, please like, subscribe and share so we can make more. Thanks for watching.